As we begin today, I want you to turn to one another, to the person to your right and to your left, and I want you to tell them these words. You are a genius. Go ahead and do it now. Some of you are saying that to someone you already consider to be a genius, and some of you are hearing those words for the first time in your lives. Congratulations, you are a genius. Let me explain why I did that this morning. Genius originally meant, in the original Latin, I'm going to get into it. You know how I am with words. We're going to get into these words. We've got to know what the words mean. The original Latin for genius meant an attendant spirit present from birth. An attendant spirit present from birth. What's born? The body. The body has a what? A spirit. Stay with me now. I've already left you. I've already lost you. The body is born from the mother, but you are a what? You're a spirit. You're an attendant spirit that came with the body. You are the spirit. The body is not you. We've talked about this a lot. What you see up here talking to you is not really me. What I see in the audience is not really you. When we pass away, we move on, but we stay the same. So you understand what I mean, right? So you are a genius. You're an attending spirit that's present with your body since birth. It's from the Latin root gignata, which means to beget or give birth. That's what the word genius means, to beget or give birth. And from this, in our great English language, which is just an amalgam of all kinds of languages kind of jammed together, we have the words Genesis. Well, we know that's the beginning. We have the word generate, to beget or give birth. We have the word generation, those who have been begotten or had birth given to them during a specific year. And from this, we can also see how if we put the prefix D, D-E, in front of generation, well, we see how degenerate, from a spiritual point of view, becomes a real issue. So when we begin to degenerate in our morality or degenerate in our spirituality, it's not hurting the body so much, although it may lead to that. It's really hurting what? The spirit, which is who we really are. Being a degenerate, spiritually speaking, is a very harmful situation to your spiritual self, your genius. So, since you are a spirit attending your body, you are a genius. And it was you yourself, your genius, your spirit that brought you here this morning to be part of this 134 people gathered here in this building. And you can be positive of that. Now, it's long been understood that a positive attitude breeds what? Positivity. Say it with me. A positive attitude breeds what? Positivity. I believe that the ingredients to build a positive attitude come from greater and greater learning, and that means greater and greater knowledge. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 11, this is just the first section of what we've come to know in our Bibles as the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus expresses the sentiment that a positive attitude breeds positivity. What I want to do is I want to show you these things, and we want to move on to these right here. From there. You've seen these before. Let's read through these. Matthew chapter 5, 3 through 11 says, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be" what? "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit" what? "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be" what? "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive." "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see." "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." Good. "Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is" what? Very good. "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against" who? "Because of me," he says. "Rejoice and be glad." Why? "Because your reward in heaven is..." For in this is the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. What is Jesus doing here? Why is he preaching this sermon? Why is he telling these people these things? What does he appear to be doing? He is encouraging people to be what? Positive. He's encouraging people to be positive no matter the circumstances. And humanity brings a whole lot of circumstances to us, doesn't it? Not all the things that we face, not all the circumstances, not all the situations that we find ourselves in are easy. Many of those circumstances and situations are just downright tough. They're downright hard. They're hurtful. They're painful. But if you have a positive attitude, no matter what the circumstances, positivity will be bred in your life. What do we call this collection of verses officially? Anybody know? Whoa, very good. I thought I was going to have to rhyme it with something, but there's not anything that rhymes with it. They're going to have to make up a word like reattitude or something. The Beatitudes. Beatitude's an interesting word. Well, we say it all the time. We've heard it since we were how tall? About this high. For how long? All our lives. But what does it mean? Where does this word come from? Was it a word they were using in Aramaic when Jesus was teaching these things in Palestine? Is it a Hebrew word? Is it a Greek word? Why is it in our Bibles? Is it a biblical word? Why do we use it today to describe this passage? Allow me to teach you this very quickly. So I'm going to put on my teaching hat right now, and you're going to learn some details. It's very important to know these details, or I wouldn't teach them. So to learn these things, we've got to go back to the Roman Latin. Beatus. Beatus is an adjective. It means blessed. And it has a noun form, beatitudo, which means a state of blessedness. Now let me explain this to you real quick. Stay with me. Don't turn me off. In 410 AD, the Roman Empire fell. And the Romance languages around the world, and Romance doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not the words you use on your first date. The Romance languages are just languages that were based on Latin, Romanesque in their language, okay? So the Romance languages around the world developed on their own after Rome fell. And from this time, the Roman Catholic Church, which used Latin as its liturgical language, began each verse of Matthew chapter 5, 3 through 11 with the word beati, beati, which translates to blessed. And then around 1520, we get the French word béatitude, béatitude, which means supreme happiness. So note the change in the meaning from the state of blessedness with the Latin to state of supreme happiness with the French. Why did that happen? Leave it to the French to do this? Well, sort of. The title Beatitudes was first used in the Great Bible of 1539 to mark these words, to mark this spot. The Great Bible of 1539, we need to understand this. When we go back as far as we can, what version do we typically go to? The King James Version, which came out in 1611. But there were several English versions before it. The official version was this Great Bible of 1539, which is authorized by King Henry VIII to be read aloud during church service in the Anglican Church, that identified this passage that we know of in Matthew chapter 5, 3 through 11 as the Beatitudes. This is where the word comes from. And so I know the next burning question that's in your mind is, why did the English use a French word to describe this section of passages? Well, that's because following the Norman invasion of 1066 and continuing through 1362, the official language of England was French. Did you know this? This is why we call Matthew 5, 3 through 11 the Beatitudes. And now you know. But wait, there's more. As you know, the original texts of Scriptures were not written in Latin or French. What were they written in? In Greek. The New Testament, written in Greek. Now remember, a positive attitude improves everything, and it makes people happy. In fact, this is what the original Greek says. It begins each verse with the word makarios, which is literally translated as happy, as in, happy are the meek. Now that's how makarios is literally translated, but it has a much deeper intrinsic meaning. Stay with me. Intrinsically, makarios describes a person who is in the enviable position of possessing God's provisions. Makarios means to make long. To make long. As in, God makes long His arm, reaches down to us, and extends His benefits to us, which we refer to as blessings. And this, of course, ought to make a person happy. And this is what Jesus is saying in Matthew chapter 5. He's saying this: those who have been blessed by the long arm of God, who has reached down and bestowed upon you His great benefits, ought to be happy. Are you happy? Okay, now that's all the teaching that I'm going to do today. A lot of information in that, and if you want it, I can give it to you later if you're taking notes. Now I'm finished teaching. I'm going to transition into preaching, because now, with all this stuff we just talked about, now we have a real theological problem. And what's that problem? The problem is that all these blessings in Matthew chapter 5, 3 through 11 are no fun. They're no fun. How can we be happy when God's blessings are poverty? When God's blessings are mourning? When there are hunger and thirst? When there are persecution? Where there are insults? Where there are false accusations and evil? Who wants that? Ooh. Not me. If I didn't know better, it sounds more like God wants us to be miserable in this life if these are the things He is blessing us with. And how can we have a positive attitude about that? Well, to understand this better, we must examine what Jesus actually meant. We must move beyond all the French and all the Latin and all the Greek and get to the motive of Jesus' talk. And here's something I hope is going to make you happy. We need to demystify this word beatitude. Now that you know what it actually means, let's demystify it and use it practically for purposes to help us in our Christian walk. So we're going to Texanize it, and we're going to put another T in there. Beatitude. Think about that for a second. Throw that on the grill of your mind and let it sizzle. And since I've just invented this word, I also get to write the etymology. It's divided into two parts. First is what? Be, which is a what? State of being, like you didn't already know that one. And then what's this one? Attitude, which means what? An outlook. In this passage, Jesus is doing two things. First, He's given us instruction on our outlook. He's teaching us how to be. Our state of being, influenced by a correct outlook on our world and on our lives while we are living in this world. That's what He's doing first. And second, He is telling us to be like God. He's teaching us how to be, and that is, be like God. Why? Because God is the giver of all good gifts, James 1:17. Therefore, God's personal attributes are also the things with which He blesses. Jesus teaches us how we ought to be, how we ought to exist, how we ought to live. For example, when He says in verse 5, blessed are the meek, well then, what must we ought to be? You know, I can't hear you. Thank you. If Jesus is saying, blessed are the meek, what ought we to be? Meek. Well, that doesn't sound like much fun to me. Doesn't meek mean powerless? No. We must get to the proper outlook on this blessing and all the others in the Beatitudes. Meekness is a benefit given by the long arm of God. Therefore, meekness is a blessing. And if that's so, only those who have been blessed by God have got it. Not everybody's got it. And so what is it, you're asking? I know you are. Meek just means power under control. Power under control. When your powers are under control, you will cause no harm, and you will cause no undue reproach. And this is existing like God. We ought to live, and we ought to exist in absolute control of ourselves, in absolute control of our emotions, an absolute control of our strengths, an absolute control of our intellect, an absolute control of our powers. This is being meek. And being meek is not being weak. Weak means you have no power to control. A weak person's power is non-existent, or it's reduced to the point that he or she is controlled by someone else, an outside force. This is completely antithetical to being meek. In fact, it's impossible to be meek when you are weak. So why does this matter? Why are you telling me this? I'm telling you this because Jesus did not say Blessed are the weak. We are not called to be weak. We are not called to be controlled by others. We are called to be powerful and controlled by self, which is influenced by the positive nature of the Word of God, which we imbibe regularly and deeply. Remember, weak equals powerlessness. Meek equals powerful, but self-controlled. Now, only a person who understands meekness can handle the blessing of meekness. God blesses those who can control their powers with the means to do so. Why? Because the earth, all of us, need powers under control. Now think about this for a second. Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall do" what? You remember? Inherit the earth. If you look at the words this way, blessed are those who control their powers, they shall be given the earth. That means that the earth will be safe, you see. Blessed are those who can control their powers. It is they who shall be given the earth. So when you are given a thing, that thing is within your power. How do we understand this? We understand it like this. Meekness equals a presence of powers. Meekness equals a presence of powers. If you've been blessed with meekness, a person who's expected to put on meekness must understand that he or she has also been blessed with powers. So, ask yourself, what powers do you possess? Do you possess powers that comes with beauty? Do you possess power that comes with intellect? Do you possess power that comes with speech, or with physical strength, or with toughness? Do you possess a power that comes with business savvy? Do you possess power that was handed down to you by inheritance? Do you possess the power that comes with a lot of money, with position? Do you possess the power that comes along with fatherhood or motherhood? Do you possess the power that came to you in the bonds of matrimony? You see, you may think you're weak, but you're not. You've got all kinds of power. Power has been given to you in some form or another. All of us possess it. In fact, some of us, actually many of us, probably possess several powers, or even many powers. How are we to wield these powers? This is what meekness comes down to. How are we to wield these powers while we exist in this world, in this life? We wield these powers with love. And what is love? Love is that fruit of God's Spirit that prompts me to seek your better good. So, being meek then means controlling our powers and seeking the better good of everyone else. We don't let all that power go crazy or act out on its own. And you know people who do, and it just brings trouble. So now, as servants of the living God, who is love, when we do this, are we acting like Him? You still with me? When we act in meekness, are we acting like God? Does God keep His powers under control? How much power does God have? All of it. Yeah, a lot. He's got all of it. He is omnipotent. How does He keep His powers under control? Well, God chooses to keep them under control, and by definition, that's God being meek. Now, Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Is meekness a character trait of God? Yes, it is. Does God keep His powers under control? Yes, He does. If God didn't keep His powers under control, that would mean that God's powers are out there going crazy. There'd be all kinds of, we see, if you watch any of the scientific stuff that's out lately about solar flares. Have you heard about this, solar flares? Every now and then the sun just has this big eruption. The sun is, you know what the sun is. These huge solar plasma shoots just shoot out from the sun, and all that energy is directed in that direction. It goes through space until it hits something and causes trouble. And many solar flares have come our way since we've been on this earth. And this disrupted power grids and all kinds of things. That's power out of control. in a way. Now, God keeps that sun contained, right? But every now and then we see a little glimpse of what power out of control can look like. When riots happen in different cities and blocks and blocks of buildings are burned and looting is going on and the police can't handle it, that's power out of control. Is that God? No. God keeps His powers in control. So is that God being meek? Yes, it is. Is meekness a character trait of God? Yes, it is. All the Beatitudes that where Jesus says, blessed is this and blessed is that, are those character traits of God? Yes, they are. And when we understand this, does it not make you smarter? And when we understand that, doesn't that make you happy? Happy are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Here's another one. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. What does this mean? There are several things this could mean, but I think the most evident one is that humility is an important trait for the Christian to have. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Humility is another benefit given by the long arm of God, one that few can handle. Think about that for a second. Humility is another benefit given by the long arm of God, one that few can handle. Why do I say that? Because when we understand what humble means, you'll see it's no piece of cake. And that's why we see it so seldom. When you go out in the world, I'm sure you don't think, man, this place, people are just getting too humble nowadays. It's quite the opposite, isn't it? People are out of control nowadays. Morality is in the gutter. Everyone's boastful and prideful and talk about me, me, me. Man, if we just had a little bit of humility, things would be better. Well, see, this is why we see it so seldom. Because people really can't handle humility. When a person is humble, he or she is submissive. Ooh, there's a word we don't like to use nowadays. Submit. Submissive. Submit to your partner. Submit to your husband. Submit to your God. You're telling me I should be this or that. I'm just telling you to be submissive. That's humility. Can you handle it? Can you handle it? When a person is humble, they're respectful. I don't have to respect nobody. No, you don't. You don't. But you'll never have the character trait of God which requires it. Humility. You'll never be blessed with humility because you can't handle it, if that's your attitude. Humility requires that we are lowly in manner. Humility requires that we are modest. Modesty today? Really? Are you going to tell me what I can and can't wear, what I can and can't say, who I should be hanging out with, who I have desire for? Modesty? A lot of people can't handle humility. Not self-asserting. A humble person must be obedient. You see how humility is no piece of cake? A humble person does this. A humble person considers the well-being of others as more essential than his or her own. A humble person considers the well-being of others as more essential than his or her own. And this is a godly attitude. For Jesus Himself lived His life humbly, and He taught that seeking self-adulation leads to self-defeat. Pride goeth before a good. Being humble, it's not for the faint of heart. Being humble takes real strength. Being humble takes real self-confidence. Jesus explained it like this. If anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. That's why humility is so seldom seen. Because our society says, be number one. Put yourself first. Get out there and make that money. Get out there and get that degree. Get out there and hit them harder. Hit them first. Make them hurt. That's not humility. And that's why this blessing also sounds like no fun. this blessing needs to be examined deeper. So, as most of you know, I just got back from Japan. While I was there, you want to hear a quick story? Okay. While I was there, a lot of stuff happened. I'm going to pick up in the middle here. Dana was in her classroom. We got a classroom she had a classroom. We got to get it set up. There's no Wi-Fi at the school. I needed to do a little work. I went down the street on base, to the officers' club. And the officers' club has a big lounge. It's got Wi-Fi. I was sitting in the officers' club. I met the assistant manager, real friendly guy. The base commander comes through, followed by his entire entourage. And he's a full bird colonel. He's got a lot of little birds, doing everything he wants done. He's just talking to everybody. Everybody's in a buzz around him. But there was one guy there. He was a special staff officer. He was a civilian. He was following his commander around. He was the protocol officer. And I heard him several times mention to anyone who would listen a long list of jobs he'd had. When I worked at Department of Defense, when I worked for Department of Justice, when I worked at NASA, when I worked at blah, 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 blah. During the hour that I stood there, I heard him talk to everybody about his life. He had a custom suit on. He had a big old gold watch. And he said, me, me, me. That's what he said. That's all he said. And then I remembered why I retired. And I thought to myself, you're not in anymore. You could tell this guy to be quiet. But I didn't. Because the base commander was right there. And I might need that base commander later on. And there's nothing wrong with having a high-powered career. I'm happy for you. Go out and get a high-powered career. But don't put yourself first. There's nothing wrong with having a custom suit. Go get a custom suit. It's great. But don't put yourself first. Nothing wrong with bling. Got all the bling you want, but don't put yourself first. There's everything wrong with placing oneself foremost in one's self-esteem. Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the what? The kingdom of heaven. The meek, they inherit the earth. They got power under control. But the humble inherit the kingdom. And where is that? Well, it's inside. It's all around. What does that mean? What does it mean? Jesus is saying, blessed are the humble. Blessed are the humble. Why? Because the kingdom of heaven can only be entered by those who do so on their knees. Me is not going to get you in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven can only be entered by those who do so on their knees. And this is why Jesus said in Matthew chapter 19, verse 23, how difficult it is for a rich man to enter heaven. Doesn't matter if you've got a custom suit and a high-powered job and lots of bling. You can be rich. The rich man in that story of Jesus represents the proud man who finds it hard to be submissive, who finds it hard to be respectful, lowly in manner, modest, self-abasing, and obedient. Pride is the characteristic of created beings, not God. Pride is the characteristic of man and angels. It is not the characteristic of God. It has no place in the presence of God. And this is why Jesus has said that those who want to enter the heights of heaven must first humble themselves by use of the small and narrow gate in Matthew chapter 7, verse 14. And in order to get through that small and narrow gate, what must we do? We've got to take off our fancy suit. We've got to take off the backpack of all our possessions. We've got to get rid of our jewelry. And we have to crawl in. That's why Jesus said, seek that small gate. And afterwards, that path is straight and what? Narrow. Straight and narrow. To enter that gate, we've got to lay down our possessions and our pride, and we have to crawl. Second thing Jesus is doing this is to tell us to act like God, because God is the giver of all good gifts, James 1:17. And therefore, God's personal attributes are the things He values. Those are the things He gives. And those are the things we have as blessings. And He expects us to use them. And He expects us to emulate Him. Just listen to the Beatitudes describe the character of God. Listen to this. God is humble. He doesn't interfere in our lives. He could come down here right now. I'm nearly done. A lot of people watching their watches. I'm sensitive to all of this. You know that, right? Because I want to do a good job. And so when you're watching your watch, I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I doing up here? I got to hurry up. Then people say, you talk too fast. Oh, I can't win. God is humble. What do I mean? God could come down right now and stand right here and prove to all of us that He is. He said to Moses, I am that I what? I am that I am. I exist. I am. But He doesn't have to if we believe. And so God is using humility. He gave us free will. We are the ones who decide. He doesn't interfere. God mourns. God mourns how? Because we don't choose Him. God mourns. God is meek. His omnipotent powers are held in reserve. God hungers and thirsts for our righteousness. He wants us to be righteous. What is righteous? It's just a state of right. Who is the arbiter of right? God is. God decides what's right. He wants us to be like Him. He wants us to emulate Him. God is merciful. 2 Peter 3:9 says He's not willing for any to perish, but for what? For all to come to what? Repentance. God is pure in heart. God is light. In Him is no darkness at all. 1 John 1:5. God is a peacemaker. He's not a God of confusion, but a God of peace. 1 Corinthians 14:33. God Himself has been persecuted on behalf of humanity since day one. God has been insulted and spoken false evils of. But despite all these things, God rejoices and is glad. And this, my friends, is why we have the Beatitudes. And why we are both blessed by them, and why understanding them will make us happy. Call to action. There are only 2 calls to action this week. In the Beatitudes, Jesus tells us how to be. How is that? What's it say? Be like God. Jesus tells us how to be in the Beatitudes. What is that? To be like God. How do we know what it's like to be like God? Read Matthew chapter 5, 3 through 11. You'll know what it's like to be like God. That's the purpose of the Beatitudes. So be like God and exhibit the character traits of God as found in the Beatitudes. And then let them strengthen your genius as you attend to your life. What's your genius? Your spirit. It's that spirit that accompanies your body. That's all it is. Your spirit. Be like God. Adopt the character traits of God. You will be blessed. Jesus says there's a blessing for every character trait of God that you accept. Can we do this? That leads us to our invitation. If you want to be baptized, now's the time to do it. If you want to be added to the body of Christ, don't delay. There's someone out here today, I'm sure, who's been waiting and waiting and waiting for the right moment. Maybe you're waiting for someone to be here. Maybe you're waiting for some... The pull of God is pulling you forward. Don't deny the pull. Come forward today as we stand and as we sing.